I found the staircase in the woods and climbed it, past the third step. Dry white paint dusted my palm when I grabbed the rail, which made no sense because the swamp air stayed wet enough to rust a flashlight in a week. At 3:14 a.m. Tuesday, I stood ankle-deep in black water and read the one rule I was supposed to treat like a wall. But the lease renewal window on my phone had 48 hours left, and missing this shift meant losing the unit. A zip-tied inventory tag on the bottom riser showed W17 in faded marker, and the laminated card in my truck had told me to log any unregistered structure with that kind of code. You know, rules don't keep you safe, they keep you usable. My boot came down to the fourth step because I wanted the compliance points, and the ground under the staircase stopped existing. Gravity didn't drop me so much as it argued with me. 1 second, my weight pulled toward the swamp, and my stomach rose like I was on a ladder. Then the next second, my knee wanted to fold sideways into gray space that had no bottom. The rail felt real and cold and gritty with that paint dust, so I clamped my fingers until the tendons in my wrist burned because letting go felt like signing something I couldn't read. Silence hit first, not fear. Frogs had been loud enough to blur together before I climbed, and my headlamp had buzzed faintly, like it always did when the battery got low. But both breathed layers vanished at once, as if someone pulled a plug. Even the little click my tongue made against my teeth sounded too sharp, and my own breathing felt like a trespass. My radio on my shoulder should have hissed with dispatch chatter, but it stayed dead quiet, which forced a thought I didn't want. If nothing could hear me, then nothing had to pretend. A white staircase with no platform shouldn't have had a landing, but the top step still waited above me, like a promise someone wrote without meaning it. The rule said, never ascend past the third step. So of course my brain tried to bargain with grammar, telling me I could step up and then step back down and call it a test. My fingers tightened again because my body didn't buy the bargain, and my eyes kept flicking to where the swamp should have been under the fourth step. The only thing under it was gray, not fog, not mist, not even darkness. Gray like printer paper left in sun, gray like drywall dust, gray like a screen with nothing loaded. I kept my boot planted on the fourth step because shifting it made my balance tilt toward that blank space, and the rail vibrated once, barely, the way a handrail does when someone else touches it from far away. A habit from my old job came back without permission. I counted bolts and hinges when I got nervous, so my gaze snapped to the rail brackets even though my throat felt tight. 3 brackets on the right, 2 on the left, and the left, most ones sat a 1/4 inch lower than the others, as if it had been reinstalled wrong. Count the steps. The phrase ran through my head like a scold, because I had already failed it, and I hated how it sounded like advice when it was really a confession. My phone sat in my chest pocket, warm against my shirt, but no service meant no bright rescue icon and no distraction from thinking. The park tablet in my utility bag beeped once when I shifted my shoulder, then flashed a compliance app splash screen and froze on it, the kind of cheap freeze that made me tap the edge like it was a vending machine. That tap echoed off, nothing. And the absence of echo made my skin crawl because sound usually gave a room shape, and this place refused to have one. A smear of paint marked the third step's nosing. The mark looked like a thumbprint dragged sideways, and it didn't match the clean, fresh white of the rest. That tiny flaw should have comforted me, because flaws mean human hands, but it made my stomach turn because it looked new and old at the same time, like something that had been repainted around it. My boot scraped against it when I tried to shift down, and the scrape didn't sound like wood. It sounded like bone-dry chalk on glass. I tried to step back to the third step anyway because the rule had to mean something, and my brain needed that comfort. My heel moved down, and the moment it crossed the edge, the pull under me flipped. Not downward, sideways. My stomach lurched hard enough to force a grunt out of me, and the rail yanked my shoulder like it wanted to dislocate it, so I snapped my knee back and hugged the fourth step again. A sharp sting ran through my palm where the paint grit cut into it, and I couldn't stop myself from whispering, okay, like the staircase cared. Renee's name showed on my, dead radio display, which should have been impossible because the radio wasn't getting power. Seeing it made my chest tighten for a different reason, because Renee wasn't my supervisor, wasn't dispatch, wasn't anybody the radio could label. She was the only other maintenance tech on graveyard rotation, and she had covered for me twice during my probation because she knew I was trying to keep my points clean. The display flickered her name like it had always been there, and my mind tried to accept it because accepting it meant I wasn't alone. My thumb pressed the transmit button out of muscle memory. No hiss, no click, just the soft plastic give under my thumb. And then a whispery sound that wasn't a voice, wasn't static, wasn't anything I recognized. It reminded me of someone rubbing a sheet of paper between two fingers, slow and deliberate, right beside my ear, and my scalp tightened like I could pull away from it. The sound stopped when I let go of the button, which made a horrible kind of sense. The staircase let me hear it only when I tried to follow procedure. A thought came in hard and ugly. I had climbed past the third step because I wanted to look competent on an audit report. And now the structure had me in a place where competence didn't translate. That selfish motive sat in my throat like a pill I couldn't swallow. And it didn't help that the tag W17 had been tied on like a joke. The kind of code a system assigns so it can track a problem until the problem becomes a person. My hands shook enough that I forced myself to do something mechanical. The utility bag strap cut into my collarbone when I leaned, so I slid it off my shoulder and hooked it around the rail, then clipped my tether line to the bag handle and the belt loop at my waist. The tether was meant for climbing culverts and leaning over boardwalk edges, not for holding me over a void, but it was real and it had a buckle I trusted. When I tested it with a tug, the line tightened with a clean, satisfying tension, and that small, normal sensation made my eyes sting. The third step sat inches below my boot, and the fourth step felt like a trap that didn't need teeth. A rule from the binder flashed in my mind. Not as words, but as the way Renee had said it when she trained me, casual like a joke. Don't go past 3. Don't even get curious. I remembered laughing and pretending I was above superstition, which is why the shame hit now sharp and hot. My jaw clenched because I wanted to fix it fast, like every other mistake on this job, and this didn't look like something a wrench could solve. The only way out felt like down, and down no longer existed. So I did the one thing I could do without moving my feet. I looked for proof. My headlamp beam cut across the rail and the steps, and the light didn't fade into gray the way it should have. It stopped at the edge like it hit glass. The beam ended in a hard line, and that line shimmered for a second, then stabilized as if some sensor had locked exposure. That wasn't swamp physics, that was camera physics, the kind of behavior a cheap trail cam had when it couldn't decide what it was seeing. A trail cam sat strapped to a cypress knee 10 yards away, aimed at the staircase. It hadn't been there on my last patrol because I would have logged it, but I recognized the housing because we ordered them in bulk for vandalism problems. The infrared indicator should have been invisible, yet a faint red pinprick glowed on its face like it wanted me to notice. My stomach rolled because someone had installed surveillance on this structure, and my own hands were still dusty from touching it. I forced my voice into my throat again. "Dispatch," I said, even though the radio hadn't worked and I wasn't going to pretend it did. Saying the word made me feel less insane because to dispatch implied someone was awake, someone had a clipboard, someone could give instructions and take blame. My voice fell into the gray and came back thinner, like it got filtered, and that small echo made my skin prickle. The rail vibrated again, and this time it felt rhythmic. Tap, pause, tap, tap. It matched no animal, no wind, no loose bolt. It felt like a code someone practiced, which made my breath catch because the only code I knew that well was the badge reader rhythm at the maintenance shed door. Tap, pause, tap, tap. The same cadence Renee used when the reader didn't catch the first try. My boot slid a fraction on the fourth step and panic hit like heat. "Don't," I told myself, harsh and small, because my body wanted to jerk and jerking felt like falling. The tether line went taut against my waist, biting through my shirt, and the pain anchored me enough to think. My head angled toward the third step again, and I watched my own boot the way I watched machinery when it was about to fail. The smear on the third step looked darker now, not wet, not dirt. Darker like the paint had thinned and the wood drank light differently. My mind tried to label it a shadow, but shadows need a light source angle, and my headlamp beam sat dead straight. The smear didn't move with my light. It stayed fixed to the step like a printed artifact. A caption glitch my brain offered, desperate for its technical explanation. Trail cams sometimes stamped nonsense overlays when their internal clock battery died. The thought should have been comforting because dead batteries are predictable, but the rail bracket that sat a quarter-inch low ruined that comfort. Somebody had worked on this structure with intention. The tether line gave me one option that didn't involve testing the void. I inched my weight upward step by step, and each move made the pull try to yaw sideways. But the rail gave enough friction for me to fight it. My shoulders screamed with the strain, and my palms stung where the grit cut it. Yet the pain felt honest. When I reached the third step with my knee, I didn't step down. I sat. I sat like the staircase was a bench, like the swamp existed, like my life wasn't balanced on a rule I broke. The world didn't snap back, and that scared me more than the gray. Sitting on the third step should have meant safety if the rule was real, but my weight still felt wrong. Like the staircase remembered the fourth step even when I wasn't on it. The edge of the third step hummed under my thigh with that faint vibration again, and my headlamp flickered once, then steadied, which made me swallow because flickers usually meant bad connection. This flicker felt like a response. My hand slid down to the bottom step, searching for the tag again. Radio 17 hung from the zip tie, and the plastic bite marks on it looked fresh, not weathered. A tiny notch had been carved into the underside of the tag, a half-moon shape that caught my finger pad. I didn't know why that detail mattered, but it stuck in my brain the way a splinter sticks, and I hated that I couldn't shake it. The trailcom's red pinprick blinked once, slow. My stomach dropped, because blinking meant it had taken a photo, and photos meant someone would review it, and reviews meant paperwork. The lease renewal window had been the excuse I used to climb, but the real pressure had been simpler. I couldn't afford another write-up on probation. That lie I kept telling myself sat heavy now, because I wasn't a hero in this moment. I was a guy trying not to get flagged by a system. The only way off the staircase came from a dumb little truth. I couldn't trust my eyes in the gray, so I trusted contact. I slid my left boot off the third step to the swamp side, not down, just sideways, and my toe hit something solid that wasn't supposed to be there. A submerged log, slick with algae. The log hadn't been visible from above, but my toe found it, and that contact sent a jolt of relief through my legs. Okay, I breathed again, and this time it sounded like prayer even though I didn't mean it to. My body moved before my mind could invent another argument. I shifted weight onto the log, kept my right hand on the rail, and pushed sideways until my hips cleared the staircase. The moment my center of gravity crossed away from the steps, the sideways pull eased, and the swamp noises snapped back in like someone unmuted the world. Frogs, insects, distant highway hum, normal layers. My lungs finally took a full breath, and it shook. The staircase stayed pristine behind me, untouched by swamp water. Paint dust still coated my palm, and the cut in my skin stung when swamp water splashed it. I wiped my hand on my pants anyway because I couldn't stand the feeling of that dust. And the smear on the third step looked like it watched me. My headlamp beam didn't stop at the edge now. It faded into cattails like it should, which made me feel crazy because the difference happened with no explanation. The first thing I did back on ground was check my badge, because I needed something simple to obey. The plastic badge hung from my belt clip, and the lanyard had a tiny crack in the clear sleeve that I always meant to replace. I thumbed the crack like a worry stone, then turned and walked fast toward my truck because my hands wouldn't stop shaking. The key fob clicked twice when I hit unlock because I always double tapped it, and a habit from living in bad neighborhoods. And the second click sounded louder than it should have. The truck cab smelled like stale coffee and damp vinyl, which felt like a relief. A shift binder sat on the passenger seat with a coffee ring bleeding into the cover, and the laminated rule card stuck out from it like a bookmark. I flipped it open with shaking fingers and forced myself to breathe through the routine. Find tab, read line, follow instruction. The tab for unregistered structures should have been bright orange, but only a jagged strip of paper remained, and staple shadows marked where something had been removed. A sentence in the binder sat under that missing tab, half obscured by the coffee ring. The page said in blocky print that looked like it came from an office laser printer, "Never ascend past the third step." A second line below it had been smudged so badly, the toner looked melted and only fragments remained. If exceed, do not, down, contact. I leaned closer, and the smell of old coffee hit my nose, sour, and I felt my throat tighten because the missing words mattered more than the words I could see. My tablet finally unfroze and threw a pop-up that made my stomach sink. A compliance alert filled the screen with cheery colors like it was a weather warning, and in the middle, it displayed a sentence that felt too clean to trust. If you locate asset W17, mark the base with orange tape and wait for morning crew. That sounded safe. That sounded responsible. That sounded like the kind of thing a person wrote to cover liability. It also sounded like a test. Orange tape sat in my console because orange tape always sat in my console, and my hand went toward it on reflex. My fingers hovered over the roll, then stopped because my palm still stung from the paint grit, and the sting reminded me that touching the staircase had changed something. I swallowed and told myself I could do this right now. I could log it clean. I could leave. I could pretend the gray never happened. My phone buzzed and Renee's name showed again, this time real. Relief hit so fast it made my eyes water, because a normal call meant the world hadn't folded completely. I answered with my thumb and forced a steady voice because I didn't want her to hear fear. "Where are you?" she said, and her voice had that tired edge we all got on Graveyard, like we talked through cotton. Near the boardwalk access, I said, choosing the closest normal landmark, and my lie started small. I didn't mention the staircase. Not yet. You okay? A pause. Then a breath that sounded wrong. My ankle's jacked, she admitted, and shame hit me because she'd covered my shifts, and now she was hurt alone. I'm near the swamp loop. I tried to check that vandalism report on the old trail cam and the boardwalk slats flexed. I heard something crack. I can't put weight on it. My hand tightened around the phone because the swamp loop sat uncomfortably close to where the staircase waited. Stay put, I said, and my voice came out too sharp because fear had found a direction. Don't try to walk on it. She gave a bitter laugh that ended in a wince. I know, I'm not stupid, Listen, did you get the memo from compliance, the one about W17? It hit my inbox and then disappeared. My stomach dropped into my shoes. The vanishing email thread wasn't my imagination then. The binder tab missing. The smudged second line, the compliance alert that sounded safe. Pieces tried to form a pattern in my head, and the pattern didn't look like an accident. I saw the alert, I said, and my tongue felt thick because saying W17 out loud made it more real. Where exactly are you? Near the old cypress knee with the camera, Renee said, and her voice lowered as if the swamp could hear. My radio's doing a weird thing. It shows your name, but I haven't called you. My mouth went dry because my radio had shown hers. Don't touch any white paint, I said, and then hated myself because it sounded like a superstition warning, not a coworker instruction. I'm coming. The call ended and I stared at my hands on the steering wheel. A small selfish thought tried to win. I could call the supervisor. I could call dispatch on the truck radio. I could follow the compliance alert and wait for morning crew, and I could keep my probation clean. That thought felt like relief until I pictured Renee alone in swamp dark with a dead radio, and my chest tightened with anger at myself. I grabbed the orange tape anyway, but not to obey. The roll felt reassuring in my palm because tape fixes things, tape marks things, tape makes the world legible. I shoved it back into the console and instead pulled out the old corded spotlight we kept for raccoon checks because its battery held longer than headlamps. The cord tangled around my fingers, and I swore under my breath because a stupid tangle could cost time I didn't have, and the lease renewal deadline flashed in my mind like a slap. The maintenance shed door sat 100 yards away, and I needed one thing from it. My first aid kit lived in the shed because the truck kit had been reorganized by someone in admin who liked inventory more than practicality. I jogged, boots thudding on gravel, and the cold air bit my cut palm, which kept me awake. The badge reader on the shed door glowed green like always, and I felt a quick, stupid relief because green meant normal. The reader beeped, then blinked red. I tried again because I always tried twice, a superstition from dealing with old tech, and the second try stayed red. The screen on the reader flashed a message too fast to read, then went blank, and my badge felt heavier on my belt, as if it carried guilt, access loss, resource gone. The system had noticed me, my breath came fast, and anger tried to cover fear. Come on, I muttered, and then forced myself to think like a tech instead of a panicking animal. The shed had a manual override inside, but outside there was only the key code pad. Code pads were supposed to be disabled after hours because of liability. Yet Renee and I both had the old code because we were the ones who fixed the pads. The code came back like muscle memory and my fingers punched it in. The pad accepted it, the lock clicked, and the door didn't open. That contradiction hit hard-proof territory in my brain because clicking means the solenoid released, and doors open when solenoids release, unless something holds them shut. I pulled the handle and felt resistance, not from a lock, but from pressure, like the door was stuck to the frame with suction. A sharp smell cut through the cold. Ozone, faint and clean. It shouldn't have been there. No storm, no broken transformer. Just that smell, and the fluorescent light over the door buzzed once, then went silent, and the silence made my skin prickle because it felt like the staircase silence trying to reach. My phone buzzed with a calendar reminder about the lease renewal documents. I almost laughed because the universe had a cruel sense of timing. But the laugh didn't come. All that came was a tight heat behind my eyes and a thought that tasted like defeat. If I couldn't even open the shed, then I couldn't pretend this stayed contained in the swamp. I backed away from the door and my spotlight flickered. Not dying, not failing, flickering like it was being shuttered. A memory of the trail cam flashed in my head and my stomach tightened because cameras and lights behaved wrong around the staircase. If the shed had become part of the same system, then the system had expanded, which meant waiting for morning crew wasn't a neutral act. It was giving the thing time. My truck radio crackled once when I climbed back into the cab. A voice came through, flat and calm, and it didn't sound like dispatch. "Do not mark the structure," the voice said, and my heart punched hard, because hearing any instruction felt like rescue. "Do not call outside the district. If you exceeded the third step, remain in place until contact arrives." The words sounded like a recorded training line, too smooth, too measured, and that made my throat tighten because recordings can lie without effort. My hand went to the radio volume knob and stopped. The binder page with the coffee ring stared up at me, and the smudged second line mocked my need for clarity. I couldn't trust the voice. I couldn't trust the alert. I couldn't trust my own impulse to obey, because obeying had already put me on the fourth step. So I did something that felt stupidly defiant. I grabbed my notebook, the one I used for field measurements, and I wrote down what I'd seen with a pen that scratched too hard because my hand shook. White staircase, paint dust, gray void, trail cam installed, radio names, shed door suction, ozone. The act of writing felt like a lifeline because paper doesn't vanish when an email thread does, unless someone takes it. A new message popped on the tablet, and the cheery alert tone made my skin crawl. The screen displayed another compliance sentence that tried to sound helpful. "If you experience disorientation, sit on the third step and wait for stabilization." The word stabilization hit me like a joke because I'd sat on the third step and nothing stabilized. That rule sounded safe, and that made it the trap. It was a way to keep a person in place. My jaw clenched until it hurt. Renee needed help, and every system instruction pushed toward waiting, toward stillness, toward letting morning crew inherit the mess. Morning crew meant supervisors. Supervisors meant HR. HR meant probation points. I could feel the system trying to turn my loyalty to procedure into a leash. I started the truck and drove toward the swamp loop anyway. Headlights cut through cattails and foggy breath, and the road felt too narrow because my mind kept measuring exit routes. The truck's dash cam light blinked to show it was recording, and that blink became a comfort because recording meant evidence. I tapped the dash twice out of habit, then realized my hand was still dusty with paint, and I wiped it on my jeans like that could erase a bad choice. The boardwalk access came into view, and the trail cam housing sat on the cypress knee like an ace. Renee's headlamp beam moved weakly near the boardwalk edge, and relief hit so hard it almost made me cry because she was visible, which meant she hadn't fallen into anything. She sat on a low patch of grass, ankle wrapped clumsily with her own bandana, teeth clenched against pain. Seeing her made the world feel human again, and that humanity made my guilt sharper. "You look terrible," she said, trying to smirk and failing. "Got locked out of the shed," I admitted, because lying felt poisonous now. Badge went weird. Renee's eyes flicked toward the swamp behind me, and her face tightened. "You saw it," she said, and the statement wasn't a question. I nodded because denying would be cruel. A faint click-click came from her radio, rhythmic, like the badge reader cadence, and my stomach clenched because the sound didn't match any channel I knew. Renee held the radio away from her ear, disgusted, and the screen on it showed my name again. "I didn't call you," she said, voice low, "but it keeps acting like I did." A small, angry laugh escaped me. "Same thing to me," I said, and the laugh died because it wasn't funny. I climbed past the third step. Renee stared at me like she'd seen me drop a wrench into a machine. "Why?" she asked, and the hurt in her voice hit harder than the fear. "Because I wanted the points," I said, and the confession burned because it was ugly and true. Because I thought I could do it and still walk away. Renee closed her eyes for a second, and when she opened them, her voice turned professional, in the way it did when she was scared. "The memo said never mark it," she said, "but the alert says mark it. Somebody is lying." The trail cam emitted a soft mechanical whir, the kind it makes when it adjusts IR filter. My skin prickled because that meant it sensed motion, and the motion in this clearing was us. The cam's indicator light blinked, and the blink felt accusatory, like a supervisor watching from a warm office. A scribble of something white caught my eye on the underside of the second step. The staircase wasn't fully visible from the boardwalk angle, but I could see the bottom 2 steps between cattails. The underside of the second step had a crude line of marker, half smeared, and my stomach tightened because it looked unofficial, like graffiti. I leaned closer, spotlight beam cutting across it, and my heart thudded because the smear on the third step matched the smear on those letters. Renee grabbed my sleeve. "Don't!" she hissed, and fear made her grip strong despite the ankle. "I need to read it," I whispered back, and hate rose because needing to read it felt like the same curiosity that had put me on the 4th step. If the system's lying, then the ugly scribble might be the only truth. The letters were half-eaten by swamp moisture, but I made them out anyway. In a shaky hand, someone had written, "If the tag is cut, the ground returns." My throat went tight because the tag had that half-moon notch, and my fingers had felt it like a splinter. Renee's eyes widened. "The tag," she said, voice strained. "The W17 tag." A cold wave of realization ran through me because I'd touched the tag, felt the notch, and dismissed it as meaningless. I didn't notice it then, and now it sat in my mind like a key I had pocketed without knowing what door it opened. My gaze snapped to the bottom step again. W17 hung from that zip tie like bait. The graffiti line said cutting it returned the ground, which implied the void wasn't magic. It was an effect tied to the tag, tied to the system, tied to tracking. A theory formed fast because my brain needed something to hold. Human explanation. This was an illegal hazard built by some contractor or prankster, and the tag controlled some engineered illusion or rigging. Entity explanation. The staircase responded to compliance codes and used them like hooks, and the tag wasn't just tracking, it was a lock. Renee watched my face and her voice shook. Do not tell me you're going back on it, she said. I can't leave it like this, I said. And anger flared, because the system had already touched the shed, the radio, the cams. If it's tied to that tag, then cutting it might shut it down. And if that's the trap rule, Renee shot back, then cutting it does the opposite. That was the moral dilemma. And it landed heavy, because either choice had a cost. Cut the tag and risk triggering something worse, or leave the tag and let the staircase keep a handle on the district. Following the alert meant marking it and waiting, which meant giving control to whoever wrote the alert. Breaking the rule meant acting without protection, without backup, and that meant danger for both of us. Renee's ankle made the decision uglier. I could carry her back to the truck and leave, and the staircase would stay, and the system would stay, and we would tell ourselves morning crew would handle it. Or I could act now while Renee needed me present, while the proof sat in front of us, and take the risk with her watching. Renee's eyes flicked to my truck, then back to the staircase. If you go, she said, voice small, I'm not letting you do it alone. I can't let you stand, I snapped, then softened because my tone wasn't fair. You're hurt. Renee's mouth tightened. I can sit and watch, she said. And if you start to drift, if you start talking weird, I'll drag you back. Her stubbornness hit me like relief, because it meant I wasn't the only one resisting the system. It also hit me like dread, because if I failed, she'd witness it. My hand went to the orange tape roll again, and I forced it away. Instead, I pulled out my utility knife. The blade clicked open with a sound too loud in the swamp, and for a second, the frogs quieted like they listened, which made my neck prickle. I walked toward the staircase with careful steps, spotlight beam fixed on the bottom step, and I kept telling myself this was engineering, not horror. A tag, a zip tie, a cut, cause and effect. The first step felt dry under my boot. That detail should have been impossible, because the swamp seeped into everything. But the wood didn't flex, didn't squelch, didn't absorb. My boot tread left no mark, and my skin went cold, because clean surfaces mean control. The rail dusted my palm again, and the cut on my skin stung like the staircase wanted me to remember it. A note in the binder came back to me, the smudged line fragments. If exceed, do not down. Maybe it said do not step down. Maybe it said do not look down. Maybe it said do not come down. The missing tab meant I couldn't trust the binder, and the vanished memo meant I couldn't trust email. So I trusted the one thing I could still verify, the tag on the bottom riser. My blade slid under the zip tie. The plastic resisted, then gave with a crisp snap, and the tag fell into my palm like a coin. The half-moon notch touched my finger again, and the moment it did, the swamp sound layer thinned, not to silence, but to a dull, distant version, like someone closed a door. The staircase shuddered. Not a big shake, not a dramatic quake. A small tremor like a building settling. Paint dust drifted off the rail in a soft puff, and it sparkled in my spotlight beam like ash. My stomach tightened because ash implies burn, and nothing burned. Renee's voice came sharp from behind me. Your headlamp just cut out, she said. I hadn't noticed until she said it because my spotlight still worked. My headlamp on my forehead had died clean, no flicker, no warning, and that felt like a resource cost paid to the system. Light gone? The ladder tightened. I kept the tag in my fist and climbed to the second step because the graffiti had promised ground would return. On the third step, I paused, heart pounding, and looked down. Swamp water still existed under me, cattails, mud, a dark log, no gray void. Relief hit hard enough to make my knees weak, and I almost laughed because the simplest action had changed the physics. Cutting the tag had done something real. Renee let out a breath that sounded like she had been holding it forever. "Okay," she said, voice shaking. "Okay, that worked." The relief lasted 3 seconds, then the rail vibrated with that badge reader rhythm again. Tap, pause, tap, tap. My stomach sank because the structure still had a voice, and that voice sounded like access control. The tag in my fist grew warm, like it had been sitting in sun, and my mind supplied a terrible possibility. The tag wasn't a lock. It was a key, and I had just removed it from the structure and brought it onto myself. A new sound joined the frogs, low and wrong. Not the paper rub this time, not the badge rhythm. A slow, deliberate page-turn sound came from somewhere in the cattails, like someone leafing through a binder one sheet at a time, careful and patient. It didn't come from Renee or my truck or any obvious source, and hearing it made my throat tighten because it matched the administrative texture of the whole thing. Somebody or something was reviewing. Renee's radio crackled and a clean voice cut through, too calm to be human. "The structure has been stabilized," it said. "Remain in place for verification." Renee stared at the radio like it was a snake. "Verification by who?" she whispered. The voice answered as if it heard her, which made my skin crawl. "By the authorized reviewer." I felt my own phone buzz in my pocket with a new email notification. The subject line preview flashed for half a second before the notification vanished, and that half second showed enough to make my stomach drop. Performance Improvement Plan Closure. Renee saw my face and swore quietly. "That's the trap," she said, and her voice shook with anger. "They want you to stay until they can make it official." The midpoint clicked in my brain like a lock. This wasn't a superstition staircase someone built for fun. This was a system that used rules to shepherd behavior, and it punished deviation by removing resources. It rewarded obedience by producing paperwork. It turned horror into policy because policy doesn't get questioned, it gets signed. My fist tightened around the tag, and the warm plastic dug into my skin. The safe move now would have been to throw the tag back onto the staircase and run, but the idea of returning the key felt like returning control. Renee needed me to be competent, and I needed the truth to be concrete. So I decided on a test, even though every nerve screamed at me to stop. "I want proof it's tied to this tag," I said, voice tight. Renee's eyes widened. "What kind of proof?" she asked, and pain made her pale. I held the tag up in my spotlight beam. "If I move it away," I said, thinking out loud because thinking alone felt dangerous, "and the staircase behaves normal, then it's engineering. If the rules follow, then it's something else." Renee swallowed. "And if moving it wakes it up?" she said. "Then we learn fast," I said, and the words came out like bravado because I couldn't admit fear without collapsing. I descended to the ground, careful not to step off the steps in a weird way, and my boots hit mud with a squelch that felt real. I walked backward away from the staircase with my arm extended, tag held out like a talisman, and I watched the steps for any sign of gray. For 10 feet, nothing changed. For 20, the rail vibration faded. At 30, the frogs came back full volume, and my shoulders loosened an inch because sound meant normal. My spotlight beam swung, and the trail cam on the cypress knee blinked again, recording. The blink felt like a witness, and I clung to that. Then the badge reader rhythm returned, and it wasn't coming from the staircase. It came from my truck. Tap, pause, tap, tap. The sound came through the truck door, muffled, like someone inside was tapping a plastic card against the dash. My mouth went dry because no one was inside the truck, and Renee's head snapped toward it too, eyes wide. A dark shape moved behind the truck's windshield. Not a person, not a clear silhouette, just a shifting absence where light should have been. The dashcam indicator blinked faster, then froze, and the windshield reflection showed something that made my stomach drop. My own face, staring out, expression blank, like a paused frame. Renee's voice came out as a rasp. "That's not you," she whispered. The rail in my hand wasn't vibrating because I wasn't touching it, yet the tag in my fist warmed hotter, and the page-turned sound whispered again in the cattails, "Closer." My body moved on instinct, not courage. I grabbed Renee under the shoulders and hauled her up with a grunt, because leaving her on the ground felt like betrayal. Pain made her hiss, and my arms strained. But I got her weight onto my shoulder because she's small and stubborn. Carrying her made my ribs ache. Yet the ache felt honest and human, and I needed that. The truck door handle resisted when I yanked it, and my stomach clenched. Not locked. Resisting like the shed door suction, pressure, control. Renee slapped the door with her free hand, angry. "Open!" she snapped, and her voice cracked. I fumbled the keys, dropped them, and the metal clink on gravel sounded like a gunshot, because the swamp had gone too quiet again. I scooped them up with shaking fingers and hit unlock twice, because I always did. And the locks clicked, but the door still fought me. A thought landed with bitter clarity. The system didn't want me in the truck because the truck had the dash cam, and dash cam meant evidence. It wanted me near the staircase where it could manage me with rules and costs. It wanted Renee as leverage because caring is a weakness systems love. My jaw clenched until it hurt, and I made a choice that felt like stepping off a cliff. I swung the utility knife blade and jammed it into the thin seam at the top of the truck door frame, where the rubber gasket met metal. The move scratched paint and would get me written up later, but I didn't care because later was already poisoned. I levered the blade, felt the gasket pop, and the pressure seal broke with a soft sigh, like a breath released. The door opened. Warm, stale air hit my face, carrying coffee and damp vinyl, and I shoved Renee into the passenger seat, because getting her inside mattered more than politeness. She gasped through pain, then grabbed the dash with white knuckles, and her eyes flicked to the dash cam. The dashcom screen wasn't black, it showed a live view of the clearing, and in that view, the staircase wasn't near the swamp loop. It was behind my truck. White steps rose in the headlights spill, too close, and my skin went cold because I'd just walked 30 feet away from it. The camera angle didn't match reality, yet the image was crisp, stable, and wrong. Renee's voice came out flat. "It followed," she said. The test produced hard proof, and it proved both hypotheses incomplete. Engineering didn't explain a structure moving without sound. Entity didn't explain a compliance memo vanishing. The third possibility formed in my head with sick certainty. The system and the structure were the same thing, a policy made physical, an access control mechanism that could relocate to stay near whoever carried the tag. I looked down at my fist. Paint dust coated my knuckles, and the tag felt hot enough to sting. The half-moon notch pressed into my skin like a bite, and I realized the notch wasn't random. It matched the jagged strip on the binder tab. Someone had cut the binder tab with the same shape, leaving a half-moon tear. Someone had removed the instructions that told a person what to do once they carried the key. My stomach rolled because that meant this wasn't new. This was maintained. Renee's phone buzzed in her pocket, and she froze. She pulled it out, face tight, and the screen displayed a notification with a corporate tone that made my throat tighten. A calendar invite for a verification meeting starting in 15 minutes. Location listed as on-site. No address, no room number, just that phrase. Renee looked up at me, eyes wet with fear and anger. "They're acting like this is normal," she said. My chest burned because I recognized that tactic. HR doesn't say, "We are about to ruin your life." It says, "Please join this brief meeting." It wraps threat in politeness, so the person blames themselves for feeling afraid. My hands trembled, and I forced them to do something useful. I grabbed the shift binder and flipped pages fast. Coffee smell and paper grit filling my nose. Under the missing tab area, I saw faint indentations in the paper, like someone had pressed hard with pen. I angled my flashlight across it, and the indentations rose in shadow enough to read without ink. A line emerged, ghosted into the fibers. "If you exceed the third step, do not step down until the tag is cut." The smudged second line had been that instruction. The binder had been sabotaged, and the sabotage had been deliberate because a person who climbed past the third step without that line would get stuck, would obey the wrong rule, would wait for verification. Renee stared at the page, then laughed once, sharp and broken. "So the safe rule was the trap," she said. "Wait on the third step. Stay still. Let the reviewer arrive." My throat tightened. I could feel the system tightening around us through subtle costs. Badge access gone, shed sealed, door suction, silence. It wanted me compliant, stationary, scheduled. Renee shifted in her seat, wincing. "What now?" she asked. And the question carried the weight of adult fear: rent, jobs, injuries, consequences. A forward pressure line formed in my head because the clearing didn't feel empty anymore, even though my eyes saw only swamp. The badge reader rhythm tapped again from somewhere close, and the dash cam indicator blinked like a heartbeat. The verification meeting invite sat on Renee's phone like a noose made of calendar software, and my lease renewal deadline sat in my pocket like a second noose. I made a decision with teeth. "We leave the district," I said, and the words tasted like rebellion. Renee's eyes widened. "The memo said don't call outside," she said, and her voice shook because disobeying policy can ruin a person faster than a monster. "They can hit you with NDA stuff. They can—" "I don't care," I snapped, then softened because she wasn't wrong. "I care, but I can't keep playing their game." The truck engine turned over with a rough cough, and that sound felt like hope. Headlights swung across cattails, and for a second I saw the staircase in the beam, too close. Then the beam moved, and it wasn't there. My stomach clenched because the structure might not need to be visible to travel. Invisibility might be something it granted as a warning. Renee gripped the door handle, knuckles white. "Don't take the main road," she said, thinking like a tech even through pain. "They have cameras?" That competence beat felt like oxygen. I nodded and cut through the service road toward the perimeter gate because avoiding cameras meant avoiding the system's eyes. The gate should have opened with my badge because I had after-hours clearance, but my badge was already poisoned, so I used the manual chain release, fingers fumbling in cold metal. The chain clinked loud in the night, and my heart pounded because loud sounds felt like invitations. The gate swung open with a groan, and relief hit so fast it made me dizzy. We rolled forward, tires crunching gravel, and the world outside the district looked normal. A 2-lane road, dark trees, distant highway lights. Frogs croaked behind us, and for a second it felt like we'd won something real. A small reward beat landed. Competence had moved us out. Renee let out a long breath, shoulders slumping. "My ankle," she said, voice shaky, "is going to cost me a week." "I'll cover," I said immediately, and the words came out before my brain could calculate the cost because Caring felt like the only clean thing left. Renee gave me a look that was half gratitude, half warning. "You can't cover if you get fired," she said. "I'm already fired," I muttered. And the bitterness surprised me because it felt true even without paperwork. The dashcam beeped once and the screen flashed "storage full" before going black. Evidence gone. I slammed my palm on the wheel, anger hot and useless. "Of course," I hissed, and my voice cracked because the system always finds the resource you rely on and drains it. Renee flinched, then reached over with shaking fingers and hit the dashcam power button, trying to restart it. The screen lit, then displayed a live view again. This time it showed the inside of my cab from an angle that didn't exist, like a camera perched where no camera sat. In that view, the back seat was occupied by a shape that didn't resolve into a person, just a silhouette, with shoulders too square and head too still. The shape held something flat and white like a laminated card, and it turned the card slowly, as if reading. Renee made a small sound, not a scream, just a breath sucked in. My hands clenched on the wheel until my fingers hurt. The road ahead looked empty, yet the cab felt crowded. Renee whispered, "Don't look back." I almost obeyed because the instruction sounded sensible, but then I caught myself, because obeying blind instructions had become a danger. I kept my eyes forward and forced my voice steady. "Read what's on the card," I said to Renee, because the dashcam view gave her a way to look without turning. Renee swallowed hard and leaned toward the screen, eyes wide. The card in the silhouette's hands showed bold printed lines. Renee read them out loud, voice trembling, and every word landed like a trap dressed as help. "If you have removed the tag, return it to the base within 1 mile. 1 mile. A measured policy limit, a radius, a geo-fence. The system wasn't supernatural first, it was logistical." Renee's voice cracked. "It says if you fail, verification escalates," she said, and her eyes flicked to me like she didn't want to say the next part. "Say it," I demanded, because avoiding words felt like letting the system own them. Renee swallowed and read the last line. "If you hear your name on a dead radio, do not answer." The silhouette on the dash cam lifted its head, and even through the screen distortion, I could tell it didn't move like a person. My stomach turned because it wasn't dramatic. It was administrative. It watched like a reviewer watches a spreadsheet. No emotion, no malice, just assessment. The false resolution shattered with a cold snap of clarity. Leaving the district hadn't broken anything. We had carried the system with us through the tag, and now the system had moved from place-based containment to person-based verification. We hadn't escaped a location. We had become the location. Renee's phone buzzed again, and the verification meeting invite updated itself. New start time. Now. Location. In transit. Renee laughed once, breathy, disbelieving. "They're scheduling us," she said. My throat tightened. I thought about pulling over, throwing the tag out the window, turning around, returning it to the base within 1 mile like the card demanded. The instruction sounded safe, and that made it poison. If I returned it, the system would mark closure, and closure would mean someone missing. Maybe me. Maybe Renee. Maybe whoever got scheduled next. I made a different choice. I took the tag, wrapped it in a rag from the glove box, and shoved it into a thermos cup. Not because I believed in containment magic, but because isolating objects is what maintenance does when an element keeps shorting a circuit. The rag dulled the heat, and the thermos lid screwed down tight. My hands shook and my cut palm throbbed, yet the act felt like fighting back in a language I understood. The dashcam view flickered. The silhouette blurred. scan lines crawling over it, and then it was gone from the screen. The cab felt lighter, and the badge reader rhythm stopped, which gave me a small competence win that cost a resource. The thermos now sat like a bomb on my seat. Renee exhaled a shaky breath. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." That did something. The road signs passed and the highway lights grew closer, yet dread stayed because the system had shown it could alter cameras, emails, radios, and schedules. It wasn't trapped by geography, it was trapped only by attention and procedure. My mind jumped to the one thing the system couldn't easily edit. Paper. The notebook in my lap. I grabbed it at a red light, scribbled fast, and Renee watched me with wide eyes as if writing could save us. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Making a warning," I said, and my voice shook, because saying it out loud made it real. "If this turns into a closed case file, I want a loose copy." Renee's phone chimed and she flinched. A new email notification flashed, then vanished again. But this time, the subject line stayed a fraction longer. Asset W17 transfer. Transfer. The word turned my stomach because transfer implies shared systems. It implies other districts, other departments, other staircases. My chest tightened with a new kind of fear, wider than swamp dark. "If this is a transfer," I said, and my voice came out hoarse, "then we're not the first." Renee's gaze went distant, thinking. "Remember the missing guy from the reservoir job last year?" she said quietly. "They said he quit. He left his badge on his desk and walked out." My stomach dropped because I remembered the rumor, the way people whispered and then stopped because HR doesn't like rumors. Renee's voice shook with anger. "He didn't quit," she said. "He got verified." The major revelation hit in a way that wasn't cinematic. It felt like paperwork clicking into place. Attrition management, liability sync, a structure that takes a person and leaves behind a narrative. Voluntary resignation, left keys on desk, badge returned. A system that eats a human flaw like ambition, denial, obedience, and then writes a clean story over it. My jaw clenched until my teeth hurt. I drove past an exit toward the hospital because Renee needed her ankle checked, and because hospitals are places with cameras and witnesses and paperwork that isn't owned by my district. The idea felt like protection, and that hope made me feel stupid because hope has gotten me hurt before. The hospital parking lot lights washed everything in sterile white. Renee leaned forward, wincing, and I helped her out of the truck, arm around her shoulders, my own muscles shaking with fatigue. The thermos sat on the seat like an innocent object, lid closed, rag inside, tag hidden. I told myself the bright public place would dilute whatever followed us. The automatic sliding doors opened and my badge reader rhythm tapped again. Tap. Pause. Tap, tap. The sound came from the hospital doors, not from any device, and my skin went cold because it meant the system didn't care about property lines. It cared about process, and hospitals run on process too. Renee gripped my arm, eyes wide. "Don't take me inside," she whispered, voice strained. "If it can transfer, it can spread." A cold anger rose because she was right, and because the thought of hurting strangers made my stomach twist. I guided Renee back to the truck, breath coming fast, and I looked around the parking lot for any sign of the silhouette. No shadow, no figure. Just cameras on poles, quiet cars, a security guard in the distance with a coffee cup. Normal. Yet the badge rhythm had sounded, and my cut palm throbbed like a warning. I had to choose a residue. Warning transmitted, harm prevented, truth exposed. Loop broken. Breaking the loop felt impossible because I didn't know how many tags existed, how many staircases, how many missing binder tabs. Preventing harm felt immediate because Renee sat in my passenger seat, hurt and scared. Exposing truth felt like the only thing that could outlast a single night. So I chose the thing I could do with the tools I had. I would transmit the warning in a way that couldn't vanish with a memo. The service road back toward the district didn't feel like retreat so much as a tactical loop, and I hated that I was looping, because loops are what systems love. I drove fast, hands steady through pure stubbornness, and Renee watched the thermos like it might open itself. Back at the perimeter gate, the manual chain release resisted. Metal felt colder than before, and my fingers slipped because sweat had dried on them, leaving salt. I cursed, then forced my breath steady because panic wastes grip. The gate finally swung, and the district swallowed us back into swamp dark. The trailhead kiosk had a glass-covered bulletin board meant for park notices. It sat under a dim lamp, and paper notices inside it looked damp and curled at the edges. That board was public, it was analog, and it was watched by no single inbox. I parked near it, grabbed my notebook, and tore out a page with shaking hands. Renee watched me, eyes wet. "You're going to get fired," she said. And the statement wasn't a threat, it was grief. "I'm already gone," I said, and the words landed with a heavy calm because I believed them now. "But I can keep someone else from stepping on 4. I wrote fast, and my handwriting looked ugly because fear doesn't do penmanship. White staircase near Swamp Loop. Do not ascend past the 3rd step. If you see W17, do not mark. If your radio shows a name with no power, ignore it. If the tag is cut, do not carry it. Call someone outside the district, not inside." I hesitated, then added the one detail that mattered most. Count the steps. Renee's breath hitched because she knew I meant it literally and morally. I slid the page into the bulletin board behind the glass, and my fingers trembled as I locked the little latch. That latch click felt satisfying, like closing a circuit breaker. A small residue, a warning that couldn't be deleted with a vanishing email thread. The district radio crackled again from my truck, and the calm voice returned. "Unauthorized posting detected," it said. "Verification escalation in progress." My stomach turned, but the anger stayed. I opened the shift binder and ripped out the smudged page with the coffee ring, the one with the ghosted indentation, and my hands shook because destroying evidence felt wrong, yet leaving it in the system felt worse. I folded it, stuffed it into my jacket, and told myself I'd scan it later at a copy shop, something outside the district network. Renee stared at me like she wanted to memorize my face. "What happens now?" she asked. I looked toward the swamp loop, where the staircase had waited, and my skin prickled because the frogs had gone silent again. The night air felt too still, and the lamp over the bulletin board buzzed once, then steadied. Somewhere in the cattails, that slow page turn sound whispered again, "Patient." My truck's dash cam blinked on by itself. The screen displayed a folder view for half a second, not a live camera feed, and the folder name on it made my stomach drop because it wasn't mine. "Transfers." Then the screen went black. Renee whispered, "They're moving it." A line from the laminated card in the binder hit me now, the one that had been clean enough to be printed without coffee stains. I hadn't noticed the physical flaw before because I had been obsessed with the rules, but the lamination edge was peeling at one corner, and under that peel a second layer of paper showed, like a revision had been pasted over an older version. I lifted it carefully, fingers trembling, and the hidden line underneath sat in smaller print. "If you've seen that symbol before, don't ignore it." Renee let out a shaky breath, and the words landed like a disguised plea, written by someone who had lost and still tried to warn. My cut palm throbbed, and the heat in the thermos seat beside me rose again. The tag wasn't cold, it was warm and growing warmer, like a living thing that didn't need breath. Renee stared at the thermos and whispered, "Don't open it." I didn't. I stared at the dark swamp where the staircase belonged, and dread settled heavy because I knew the worst truth now. The system didn't need the staircase to be in the woods. It only needed someone to carry the code. I just realized the badge reader rhythm had never come from the radio at all.